Hello everyone, I'm back with a new top 10 and this week it's my top 10 TARDIS Console Rooms. Now apologies for not doing a top 10 for a few weeks. The main reason for this is just because I was focusing on getting Winner Takes All completed in time. I've not had as much time to make other kind of videos, so apologies for that, but the series hasn't been cancelled and I've still got a few more planned. So without further ado, here are my top 10 TARDIS Console Rooms. Now in 10th place I've put the third Doctor's TARDIS from the Time Monster. Now the Time Monster isn't in a story that I've actually seen, but I'm quite familiar with the TARDIS, with the vacuum-formed roundels, and they just look a bit ugly, to be honest. I don't like them at all, and obviously lots of other people didn't like them, and that's why they were never used again. So yeah, I've not seen this TARDIS on TV, I must admit, but from what I have seen, it's just a bit of an eyesore, really, and it's not a very appealing design, so I'm not a big fan of it. In 9th place, I've put the 4th Doctor's Console Room, which I believe was used from Season 13 onwards, with the exception of Season 14 when it was the secondary console room. And this is another console room that I've not really seen much of on TV, but from what I have seen, from the pictures, it just looks a bit too kind of colourful and modern and metallic. And in the images I've seen, the time rotor in the middle looks like it goes up much higher than previous ones, from the 60s TARDIS. So I'm not a massive fan of that look. I think it should either be all the way to the ceiling or just go up and down in the centre and not go very, very high up. And then there's the pillars, which I'm not a massive fan of as well. So overall, I don't really like this console room that much. In 8th place, I put the secondary console room, which was used in Season 14. And again, it's not one that I've seen lots of on TV, but I'm just not a massive fan of the overall design. I think, first of all, the wood panelling everywhere. In some TARDIS designs, it works to have kind of wooden parts or wooden panels, but I think to have the whole thing kind of clad in wood, it just doesn't work for me. It doesn't really look like a spaceship. And I also don't like the console itself in the centre. I think it's far too small and there's no time rotor. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird one really. I mean, I do like the design of the secondary console room, but I just don't really think it works for the TARDIS, if you get what I mean. In 7th place is the first modern TARDIS to make it onto the list, the 11th Doctor's first TARDIS. Now, this is one that I really did quite like when it was on telly. It was when I was really getting into the show, Series 5, to 2010. And one thing I do like about this TARDIS is how it's much bigger than the 10th Doctor's TARDIS, and it has all these doorways and stairs and things going off to different corridors and areas of the TARDIS, which gives the bigger on the inside feel a lot more than previous designs. But overall, I think it's just a bit too flashy, a bit too much like a toy box. It's just a bit too kind of fancy, I think. It doesn't really look like a TARDIS, it looks more like something else. But it will always hold a special place in my heart because this was the TARDIS that was on, like I say, in the 11th Doctor era when I was really getting into the show. And I do like the addition of the stairs and the corridors and things like that. But overall, looking back, the colour scheme puts me off quite a lot, unfortunately. In 6th place, I put the 80s TARDIS used by the 5th, 6th and 7th Doctors from the 5 Doctors onwards up to Battlefield. Now, this is basically just like the original TARDIS, where it's just a bit more kind of modern, upgraded, and I think that the console, while it is more modern, it's not quite the same as the original for me. I think I prefer the original, because this one just looks a bit more kind of like an Earth computer. It doesn't look as alien to me, and I think in that sense it looks a bit more cheap as well, cheap sci-fi. But having said that, I do like this console room. I like the feature of having a screen on the wall. I think that's a much more practical decision. I'm not a massive fan of the pillars, but I guess they work to kind of separate the roundel walls out a bit more, which was something that we didn't really see much in the 60s. So it's a nice spin on the original 60s TARDIS design, but for me, I think the 60s is just slightly better. In 5th place is the 9th and 10th Doctor's TARDIS, which is another TARDIS that I liked at the time when I was watching it on TV, but looking back, I'm not a massive fan of the kind of coral motif and the whole thing about how it's made up of junk picked up by the Doctor. I don't really buy into that. I'm not entirely sure why, but I just don't like how the console itself looks really kind of old, It's not a very modern TARDIS. It looks very kind of ancient. It's a good design. I like the design, but I think for the TARDIS, it's not quite what I think of when I think of the TARDIS myself, I just don't really believe that the Doctor would have made up the new console from bits of junk that he'd picked up over the years, But having said that, it is an impressive design. I do like it in many ways. I think the coral ribs are quite nice and the curved roundel walls. But another thing that I don't like about this TARDIS is how it's lit in Series 1 and 2, and 3 to a certain extent. It's really kind of dark and green, just green light coming from the console, but that was fixed for Series 4 and the specials. So this TARDIS does hold a special place in my heart, like the 11th Doctor's first TARDIS, but looking back, it's not one of my favourites. Now in 4th place I put the first Doctor's TARDIS, the original TARDIS, and I have kind of touched on this briefly already in this video, but I'll say why I like it in more detail now. I think really, although it was made quite cheaply, because the show didn't have a very high budget in those days, because it's in black and white, it kind of makes it a bit more magical. I love the simplicity of the console and the walls with the simple roundels. I think that works really, really well. And also, the kind of feature of how the different parts of the TARDIS were assembled and moved around between stories. I think that kind of adds to the magic, although the TARDIS isn't always consistent because things get moved around and put in different places for different stories. I think that kind of gives it a more alien feel, in my opinion, and it makes it more interesting than other console rooms. So the 60s TARDIS, the original, it's absolutely fantastic. It didn't have the highest budgets, but I think for the time it's a great design and it was realised really, really well, and it will always be one of my favourites, I think. Now the first TARDIS to make it into my top 3 is the War Doctor's TARDIS, and I have to admit myself, I didn't really see this coming. But it's a beautiful hybrid of the 10th Doctor's TARDIS, with the classic walls, and obviously the kind of grey floor as well. And the console is slightly different, it's kind of an earlier stage of the 9th and 10th Doctor's TARDIS. I just think it works really well, even though the classic walls, they don't go all the way up to the ceiling, like the curved roundel walls on the 9th and 10th Doctor's TARDIS. I suppose it kind of gives it a more open feel as well, and you kind of wonder what's behind those walls in the blank spaces. I also really love how they got all the wires hanging around and on the floor as well, a kind of homage to the classic TARDIS, I suppose. But yeah, I will admit I can't really put my finger on what exactly it is that I like about this TARDIS, but it's a fantastic design. I really, really love it. Now, I've ended up putting the TV movie TARDIS in 2nd place. Again, this isn't a move that I saw coming really. I didn't really know that I rated it so highly. But I've always kind of had a soft spot for it, because it's just... Well, I mean, firstly, it's the first TARDIS console to have the time rotor go all the way up to the ceiling, and the first to introduce the ribs stemming out from the main console and time rotor. It's also much bigger than the classic console rooms, and like the 11th Doctor's first console room, and of course the Capaldi one as well, it has all these doorways and corridors leading on to different parts. This is the first time I think when TARDIS design really reflected the idea of it being bigger on the inside, properly. I also really love how it's kind of more like the Doctor's home. He's got comfy chairs and rugs and bookshelves and drawers. It's just a lot more homely. And I think as well, I just really love the Victorian feel. There's something about it, and the kind of gothic, dark lighting and brown wooden colour scheme. I suppose it's kind of contradict what I said about the secondary console room, but this TARDIS is more interesting and varied and homely, and for that it's definitely one of my favourites. And in 1st place is the 12th Doctor's TARDIS, and also the 11th Doctor's second TARDIS, the same set obviously. Although actually I do prefer it when it's Capaldi's TARDIS. I mean, first of all, the kind of warmer lighting just gives the TARDIS a warmer feel, it's less empty, and then also it's literally less empty because it's got the added bookshelves and the roundels in Series 9, and the desks and chalkboards that the Doctor uses. Like the TV movie TARDIS, it's more homely. The Doctor spends time in there doing calculations and making things like we saw him doing in The Caretaker, and making a device out of scraps. And I think this TARDIS in particular strikes the right balance between kind of new and old. It's modern, but at the same time, it's not too sci-fi, in my opinion at least. It has all the old bookshelves and the old books, and the chalkboards and the desks. So yeah, I think it strikes the right balance, and it's an absolutely fantastic design by Michael Pickwood. It really, really is. I also really love about this TARDIS that it's the first one to be built as a kind of 360 set, and they can remove pieces of the walls and walk around on the higher levels to get different camera angles. So from that perspective as well, this TARDIS is best for getting different angles and different shots and more interesting shots, I think. So yeah, all these things combined just make this TARDIS design the best so far, in my opinion. So thank you very much for hearing me ramble on about my favourite TARDIS designs, and please comment your lists below as well. I'd really love to see which ones everybody else likes and dislikes. I've done Doctors and Companions and episodes so far, favourite episodes and least favourite episodes, But with this, I'm not really sure what the kind of general consensus is. I'm not really sure which TARDIS Console Rooms people really like, so please do comment your lists below so I can compare them to mine. Next week I'll be doing my top 10 Sonic screwdrivers / devices, so please do watch that. So thank you very much for watching, I'll see you next week for that, and bye for now.